Okay, good morning, everyone. My name is Stacy Mildenberger. For those of you who don't know me, I am the Customer Success Manager serving the state agencies and local municipalities in Florida. I typically have a couple of my peers join our Cute4teams office hours. Both of our comrades are out of the office or unavailable today. So you've got good old Stacy holding down the fort, and I'll be sure to tell Nash and Ricardo that we missed them. Welcome to the group. If you haven't attended before, it is a completely open session. I have a demo tenant at the ready. We can click through some things. If you have any questions, feel free to raise your hand, throw them in the chat, come off mute. You have all the meeting capabilities other than camera share for this meeting. So feel free. I did see that we have one question in the chat already from Glenn. Glenn had a question about maybe the difference. Glenn, I think you're trying to identify what the difference is between breakout rooms versus channels. And I can certainly tackle that one. I want to make sure I understand that if that's what you're after. You're just looking for the general difference.
Well, I'll give you, here's the background information. We're working with two separate groups at work. One is putting on a wellness fair. Now, pre-COVID, the wellness fair, we had a large hall with lots of tables in the hall, and all the health insurers were at the table, and the employees would walk around and, you know, blah, blah, blah. So they're saying, how can we do this in teams? Should we do it in channels? And I said, no, you should do it in breakout rooms. Because, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think in channels they have to be named members to participate, and with this, over the course of the day, we're going to have about 6,000 people coming in and out, but I don't think there'll be more than 1,000 at any given time, so I think we can still do the regular teams instead of live events. I said you can assign each health insurance person to a breakout room and then have a central main meeting moderator, and people can shift back and forth between the breakout rooms like they did with the tables. And so you should have breakout rooms instead of channels. And the other question is for new hire training. They said, we have certain named groups. We have the names before they come in of new hires, and we're going to be putting certain groups into certain classes. And so should we set that up in channels instead of breakout rooms? And I said, yes. So am I giving them correct advice, or do you have anything that you'd like to add or correct me?
Yeah, I think you're well on your way to utilizing both of those tools in what I would consider like the best practices for those tools. I mean, I definitely see how the wellness event that was typically in person could take advantage of the Teams meeting. I'm really proud of you for pointing out that you don't anticipate having more than 1,000 participants in that meeting at a time. That would be an important upper boundary to be aware of. The fact that you're not sure who's going to attend or when they're going to attend or who they need to talk to, I think breakout rooms is a great way to do that. And because you know who those breakout room, at least the initial participant could be at the beginning of the meeting with those folks who would be otherwise manning a table, right? I think that's a great way to go. And then your other scenario where you said the new hires coming in, you will have their credential, you know who they are. I'm assuming, would they be using their internal credentials or their pre-hire credentials?
Internal.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, that's a great scenario where you're throwing them into a team together and allowing them access in a channel to have all of the new hire events tied to that channel. I think that makes perfect sense, and I think you guided your end users appropriately in both cases. Good job.
Well, thank you.
Has anyone else in the group done a new hire event or a wellness event or any sort of hiring event where you've had perhaps a Teams meeting to manage in order to facilitate folks coming in and out? Yeah, Brian.
Oh, I was just saying we use Teams meetings at the Ohio Department of Jobs and Family Services constantly, and we have a regular new employee orientation that we do through it. And one of the nice things we do with that is with the Teams meeting, we are able to use the raise your hand feature so people can ask plenty of questions, but
Yeah.
cut people off and, create issues with that. But it also allows us to kind of guide the questions that are in my specific instance that will affect no one else. What do I do? And kind of shift those people over to a chat or like a person-person chat outside of the meeting. So
that's a great idea. Yeah, because I can imagine folks who join those may have some very nuanced individual questions that they may not even want to ask in the general meeting along with everyone. So that would give you a way to segment that conversation off. That's cool. Good idea.
So I did have a question about breakout rooms for an event.
Okay.
Can you create multiple breakout rooms and let the end user choose which one they go to?
Yes, but I think what you would do is create those breakout rooms, and perhaps how many users would you have in that meeting where you want folks to be able to choose?
200.
Okay, so it would be quite a long list. Would you know in advance of the meeting what the breakout rooms were?
Well, if we knew ahead of time, we can put people where they want to go.
Yeah.
I was thinking more along the lines of, hey, we have these 3 great topics going on. We touched a little bit about each one of them. So go ahead and pick where you want to go, and we'll go into the breakout room for 15 minutes and come back and see how it went.
Yeah, I believe the only way to access the rooms at this point is to be assigned. So if you knew the topics in advance, yeah, you're right. You could just kind of poll people, find out where they want to be, and then place them like you typically would. If it's topics that come up on the fly, with 200, that would be difficult to do where you're, grabbing them and assigning them based on maybe what they say in chat, or they're raising their hands on which topic to go into. If you have multiple breakout room managers, because you do have that ability now, it could be something that in a group of 200, you could say, raise your hand if you'd like to go to topic 1, and then you have that breakout room manager grab those folks. And then you do the same for topic 2 and topic 3 with separate breakout room managers to handle that.
Is that in GCC yet?
I
noticed you can allow other people, but it seemed like only one person could control that at a time.
Yeah, actually, now that you mention that, I think you are right in that you can name or you can delegate to a breakout room manager, but it's still just one active at a time. Let me look and see what other ideas we can do for assigning rooms on the fly like that, like your particular use case, and get back to you. Because it would be awesome if you could have more than one manager at a time to do that. But I think in the GCC, it is limited to one at a time, unfortunately.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I'll just have to think about it. Does anyone else have any suggestions or anything that you've seen executed that might be helpful in this scenario? If not, that's okay. We can move on. I've got a, oh, Jim, I like your suggestion. Do you want to speak to that?
I have no idea how I would do it because I've never been successful with Power Automate, but I've heard you and Ricardo and Nash speak about it frequently enough to think that if you created a Microsoft form, had the link in there with the different chat options, the participant would be able to select. It would automatically go to the linked capture, and I'm not sure if you could then actually have Power Automate make the change, or at least queue up the changes to be made to the manager.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think that's an interesting approach, but in that approach, you would definitely need to know what those topics were in advance. And it sounded like Brian's use case in particular was that these topics kind of develop separately. But your proposal is something that we can certainly do. When you use a form, a Microsoft form as the base, Power Automate can certainly take responses and do all sorts of things with the incoming information. I did have another thought, Brian, as we were talking and going over the scenario. What if you just spun up a new meetings for each of those topics? Granted, they would require the person to leave where they are and go into another meeting. They could stay on hold in the existing meeting. And then when they hang up from their topic conversation, they would come right back and restart in the main meeting. You can have concurrent meetings, and you certainly could put in the chat the link per topic to the additional meetings that were needed. Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely. That's kind of how we envisioned it before, but we always like using the new shiny toys out there. And
yeah, absolutely. I think with the assignment constraint, that separate meetings may be the way to go. I see another hand raised. Mr. Hayes?
Hi,
Ms. Hayes?
Tim Hayes. In the
Tim,
State Department, we did what you just suggested. We actually did it where they set up a team, they made it a public team, and then they had channel meetings in each channel. It was like a hiring, what do you call it? Like just an exhibition, right? And so normally we would have done it in person, and they would have had people at a table. And so they started off with a central meeting on like the general channel, and then they just explained to everybody, like you said. It can be a little complicated for brand new people, but then people could just go through the channels. They could see who was, and then they had people from each office that wanted to interact with people. All the meetings were active, right? And so people could just go through the channels and see who they wanted to join with. So if that was the use case where it was just, picking which meeting you wanted to join, that worked very well. And like
that's a great suggestion.
I was able to bounce around. I think you can be up to 4 meetings at one time. You'll be on hold with 3 of them, but it was real easy to move around. Just something to throw out.
Yeah, I love that that idea with the public team. I think that would go a long way with bringing engagement in, because there would not be any boundary necessarily for who has to be a member, or they could make themselves a member, I guess is the right terminology, and then having those channels defined in advance so they could see what their options are. That's a great suggestion, and doing channel meetings that way. I could see why that was effective.
I mean, I agree that breakout rooms is kind of the thing people want to do, but this was actually before breakout rooms, and it is a way to kind of simulate that.
Right. Yeah, it was certainly the way that a lot of folks took care of their conference type sessions pre-breakout rooms, for sure.
Yep.
Any other questions out there today? If not, I do have a couple of things I can talk about.
If I could, Stacey, I had just one quick question. We were asked through the customer success people if we wanted to get to the front of the line for webinars. So we've had webinars turned on. Okay. One question that has come up is people have seen the Q&A feature on the commercial side. We've seen nothing in any of the roadmap activity about it, and just don't know if you know anything about it, but it's a feature. There's an online app called Slido. I don't know if you've heard of it, but it's become very popular. Essentially, people can ask questions, during a town hall or during a big meeting, and then others can vote the questions up. So it allows kind of an online moderation of it. The Q&A app seems to be quite similar to that, but we were just interested in whether or not there was any information if it's going to make its way into GCC.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have any specific information around that, but I could see why that would be so exciting and so relevant. I actually was working on a custom app that we were hoping to package for the GCC in the meantime, while we wait for the Q&A roadmap to be defined for our Teams meetings. I can check with one of the other CSM specialists who's got that Power App in flight and let you guys know what the status is of that. But I think it's absolutely going to be a wonderful tool. And I was not familiar. What was that third-party app that you mentioned?
It's called Slido.
Slido.
Slido. Yeah, it's
Okay.
worth looking at because, like I said, it is very, very popular here in the department.
And it includes the upvoting of the questions. I think that's a
You
neat
can do
angle.
upvoting and you can also do polling. Obviously, you know, you can do the polling now, but and people can moderate it as well. So, like, you know, they can. We've had some big town halls with 1,000+ people, and you know, some questions were inappropriate, so they can be moderated out. So it's really a very it's a very good capability. And what it does is it allows the Q&A sessions to go really smoothly.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now that we have the extensibility in meetings, if you guys haven't tinkered around with that at a minimum with, say, forms, it is a fantastic way to up the engagement in your team's meetings. And I see a lot of innovation in that area from our partners and third-party vendors who bring these tools in. Like I said, we're looking at Q&A becoming a proper feature for the GCC added into Teams meetings, but unfortunately, I just don't have the roadmap information. And I can tell you we've done some innovative things from our CSM specialists in just seeing what we can package up using Power Apps and make templates from that to share with you all, much like those other app templates that have been out for some time, and the sample apps as well, like Milestones and some of the other ones that are available. Great.
The only other thing I'd add, Stacey, is you know, first look at the webinar. We only had it for about a week, but it looks real good just for everybody else on the call.
Yeah, and I think everybody else won't have long to wait. I've been checking with some customers here in Florida, and I'll start doing that daily because I anticipated arriving. I think we're within a few sleeps, so to speak, of having webinar out for everyone. And it's a pretty cool tool. It's one of the things that I was going to touch on today. Let me go ahead and share out my demo tenant because I want to I have the ability to demo webinar for you. For those of you who haven't seen it or heard of it, it's a fantastic way to handle registrations for your Teams meetings. And it's going to come with the attendee dashboard that we've all been excited about getting. So you can see who's registered in advance. Folks can cancel their registration on their own. So there's some end user enhancements that allow that interaction, as well as track the attendance during the meeting and after, and have that attendee dashboard to show things off. Before I'll be working on sharing, but while I do that, let me also mention that Walkie-Talkie for iOS has landed in the government cloud. That is a fantastic feature that includes push-to-talk capability, and that can be used in any channel among your members from the mobile device. So we've had Walkie-Talkie for Android out for some time, and having the iOS devices capable for that as well is just super exciting to me. I think there's going to be tons and tons of use cases that come out of that availability. So let me fire up this VM. Okay, you should be seeing my admin GCC demo tenant. I'm going to go ahead and turn off my camera since I have to stare at that other screen. I don't want to look like I'm turning away from you guys. Oh, Brian, I see. Will the Q&A ability that live events have be coming to Teams meetings? I guess we already discussed that. Sorry, I didn't see your question earlier, but yes, I just need to define our prompt engineering for the date some. So looking at my my demo tenant here, you can see that I have the ability to now schedule webinars. I'm on my calendar app in Teams, and I can tell if I'm enabled for webinar by going to my new meeting button, selecting the drop down, and then you can see the various options. These are the 3 types of events and meetings that you can do in Teams. If you don't have webinar today, you soon will. It is going to come to government tenants on by default and will be governed by whatever meeting policies are out there. So when I click webinar, I'm going to see the typical UI with a couple of new things to point out. So this is a requirement or registration, and it can be required for any type of webinar that I want to deliver. Perhaps I want to have only internal participants. I can certainly scale this to be appropriate for the webinar topic and the audience. I can skip the registration. I can make it set to only require registration for folks in the org or folks in my agency, or I can make it available for everyone. The for everyone is going to rely on some settings in your tenant to enable access for outside folks to register for whatever webinar you're doing. If those settings are open in your tenant, I know that they are for several agencies who have close partners in the community here in Florida. I would imagine that's your case as well. You can do for everyone and then have your webinar be able to be registered for by anyone, regardless of their agency, which could be very important for those of you who have cross-agency topics that need to be delivered, or perhaps meetings that you want to, or webinars that you want to provide to the public. That kind of registration would give you the ability to do that. So my defaults in my tenant is that these registrations are for everyone. You can see at this little note at the top explains to you that you send them the link to the registration form that's designed as part of this webinar invite. And you can click here on View Registration Form. It's going to launch an additional tab into your Teams window. And from here, you can define what that form looks like for those folks that you want to invite to your webinar. So you can give your event details. It's going to default to the time you selected on your calendar for the event. You can tweak that, of course. You can put in any description of your webinar here. You can even add a little section for the speaker with a bio or some other information for that. And then this is the form out of the box that they would be filling out as a potential attendee to your webinar. First name, last name, and email. If you want to collect any additional fields from your webinar attendees, you can certainly do that. Jim, I'll show you that in just a moment. There's a tab associated with all of these webinars called the Attendee Dashboard. And from that dashboard, you would have access to export your registration, your attendee info, and all of that. You could even customize how this form looks by uploading an image specific to your webinar or specific to your agency. So this is going to make for a very good experience for your webinar invitees. Once you customize this the way you want, you copy the registration link, and then you can share that registration link out to other users. The registration link, let's see. Let me close this down. Now, what you're doing here on the internal webinar on your calendar is making sure that you invite any presenters, any of the folks that are going to be internal to the webinar and presenting is who you would want to include on this. And then you send everyone else the link to the registration form, those people who are going to be in the audience in the webinar. Just like in, let me go ahead and add a presenter so you can see how this resolves after it's created. So let's just say I've populated this and I'm happy with it. I'm going to go ahead and send this invite to Johanna, because once it's sent, it's going to get all of the extra features that webinar comes with, including that attendee dashboard. So now you can see across the top where you were used to seeing breakout rooms, whiteboard, and those other features for your meetings, you also have this one, the attendance tab. This is where all that data is going to park when your registrations are completed, when if anyone cancels, that'll be reflected here. So you get a count That's what is going to appear here when you have registrants. And I can open one that I've been tinkering with so you can see the count. But you would get a count here for the registrants, a count here for how many viewed the registration page, how many registered, and if there were any canceled registrations since it launched. And then you would actually get a roll of those folks. Their name, their registration status is going to be registered or canceled or attended, and the registration time is just a date stamp for when they did that. And you'll notice up here, Jim, I have a download button. So when this is populated with a long list of folks who are going to attend my webinar, I can download that information, put it in Excel, do all sorts of Excel analysis on it, and combine it with perhaps additional webinar topics that I've done that I want to keep a running tally of the webinar participants, say, over the course of a year. And then, of course, once it's in Excel, you can do all kinds of fantastic reporting on it by plugging it into Power BI. So the capabilities now that you have to do this registration process are much more enhanced and native to Teams, rather than you having to utilize perhaps forms or Power Automate in order to automate some of that registration process. This takes a stab at doing that for you. Now, this attendance tab is available as soon as the invite is created officially by sending it, and then it stays with this meeting. In addition to the rollout for webinars, bringing the attendee tab to webinars, you now have the attendance tab, or once webinar lands in your tenant, you're going to have the attendance tab in a typical meeting as well. So this is just a, let me see, I guess this is the best one. So this is just a meeting that I was tinkering with yesterday, and you'll notice that the attendance tab is part of your meetings experience now too. And in that attendance tab for team meeting, it's going to do similarly to the webinar, where it's going to show you how many participants attended, the start and end time for the meeting. You can see this was a very quick experiment that I ran in this meeting yesterday, but it's going to track the meeting duration, how long the average attendance time was, and then give you a list of all those participants and their data. Again, you can download that and take it out to Excel to do more with it. So there's enhancements that are coming with this rollout that pertain to meetings as well. So for those of you, I think, Tim, you said you had webinar in your tenant today. I would imagine you've seen or noticed those changes in Teams meetings, regular old Teams meetings enhancements too.
Yeah, I'm not sure. The one thing we did notice, if I could just point out, when you create a regular meeting, let's say you go and create a regular meeting, if you now go back in and edit it, you can actually turn it into a webinar. You can change the registration, right? Yes, you can. And even from the get-go here, in creating a new meeting, you have some of that functionality there too. Could you explain a little bit the behavior there? So what if you sent out, let's say you invited 5 people to a meeting, and then you went back in and now you changed it to make so people had to register. Are those people going to be presenters, or what's going to or are they going to have to register? Because we did discover that people need to register to join the meeting. So if you send them the link, they will not, you send them the registration link, but until they register, there's no way they can get into the meeting. Right, right. Well, I mean, we could do a quick experiment here for anyone who's got a little extra time. We are at 11:30, so typically this is when we'd end, but I don't have a meeting immediately following, so I'm happy to do a quick test, Tim, and see how that works. I did launch a little Teams meetings here. This is a regular meeting, not a webinar yet. And I'll go ahead and put, let's do meeting to webinar. I would assume, and I shouldn't assume, especially since we're about to test, but my thinking is that the attendees, the 5 attendees that you add when it's just a Teams meeting, are going to be considered presenters if it becomes the webinar approach after being created. But let's see what happens. So meeting to webinar. And right now it's just
request a meeting. And I'm going to let me add Johanna again, and I'll even add Nestor, and then I can forward the registration invite to additional folks later. I'm not going to add a channel. Okay, so we'll go ahead and create this as a typical Teams meeting. So this meeting, plain old Teams meeting, and I'm going to go back into the details and see how we can modify this to take advantage of webinar. So here's the team meeting. Here are my participant folks. And let's see, there's the link that you could send later. Let me change this to require registration, right? Tim, this is the scenario we're testing.
Yep, that's exactly right.
Okay, terrific. So once we require registration of this, then let me go into meeting options. I'm curious to see if Johanna and Nestor are then considered presenters or not. No, it's still got the regular meeting options default. So you would need to make sure that you don't skip the step if you intend for those folks to be presenters. They won't automatically become them just by nature of adding registration requirements.
You didn't send the update, Stacey. I wonder if that would have actually done that.
Okay, well, we can certainly try. Let's drop that out. I'm going to say everyone again, click save. Okay, let me go back to the meeting. And I changed that. I'm curious if that should be good enough. Let me go ahead and do that. Okay, so it's cranking on it. You can see it's changed its fundamentals to have the webinar icon on the top here. I bet you're right that activated something. Let's see if that made them presenters or not. We can compare these two. Okay, it did not automatically make them presenters, Tim, but I can tell you it did change the meeting options to default to a webinar meeting options. And you can see on the left, the meeting options I had open before, particularly in this section here, where you're allowing mic and camera for attendees in a typical meeting, a webinar is going to disable those by default.
Mm-hmm.
So
the other thing
the
other thing I'd say is if everyone in the meeting can present, essentially they are presenters, right? So it has preserved them as presenters. That's not showing them individually, but they would be able to present, right?
That's true. That's true. They would fall in that category. And that's the default for my tenant. This is probably not the default for your tenant. I have my demo tenant here for GCC set up as permissively as possible because I'm always tinkering with the enabling things and trying new things. So I would imagine yours is probably going to default to people in your organization or something along those lines, and that would have given Johanna and Nestor that as well. Okay. I see a couple of questions here. Jim asked for the link to documentation on the push to talk feature. I sure can. I'll throw that in the chat before I click end for the meeting. And I will also bring some additional documentation, and perhaps we can demo the walkie-talkie when I have some of my peers join us next week. Tim, go ahead.
Sorry, I don't want to take over the meeting, and I know we're past the one thing that we did notice that I just think other people might find useful.
Sure.
When you do a webinar, if you go to your lists and you go to my list, you will find a bunch of lists have been created. And if you delete those lists, it destroys the webinar registration and everything else. So it's actually the data for the registration apparently is going into lists. And we just happened upon this because we were doing something on lists and somebody went to my list and like, what are all these things? And we just throw that out to everybody in case you have, and people who find that and decide they want to like get rid of those lists, they would actually destroy their webinar data.
Yeah, that's a very, very, very good point. And yes, if you are not enabled for lists in your tenant, that's going to be a blocker for webinar as well.
And that right there where it says recent, if you drop down that arrow, you can go to my, and that's what happened, my list.
Right.
And all those with those
These
numbers
events.
in there, see events, it's real obvious what they are. But
Mm-hmm. Yep. Great. That's an excellent point. I'm glad you made that.
the last point I would make is for live events, we had, we had turned off the allowing external participants, so people outside of our organization for live events, because there was concern that if the link got shared and there'd be no way for people to know who was joining.
Mm-hmm.
And, there was more of a security issue. But we were able to turn on for webinars because you have that registration list. So it was really, if you happen to be in a situation where, you had security people who didn't want to turn it on for webinars, I think you have a very good solid case to make to say, why not turn it on? Because you will be able to track all the registrants.
Correct. And without them registering, they're not going to have access. So that's a great boundary that hopefully will open up that opportunity for anyone who's got a blocker against that in IT. Great. Well, wonderful Cute4Teams meetings. Thanks for all joining us. We do this every Friday at 11. I anticipate having our full staff on board again next week. So we'll look forward to having you back. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe and check out the blog for more content.